I never thought I'd be standing here, staring at the mahogany coffin that held my father's body, feeling like the world had suddenly stopped spinning. The weight of grief pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I was only 21, a junior in college, and now I was facing a future without the man who had been my rock, my guide, my biggest supporter. The news of Dad's cancer diagnosis had come like a bolt from the blue just 6 months ago. We'd all been blindsided, Mom, Dad, and me. One day he was complaining about persistent back pain, and the next we were sitting in a sterile doctor's office, listening to words like stage 4 and metastasized. It didn't seem real. Dad, with his booming laugh and bear hugs, couldn't possibly be sick. He was invincible, wasn't he? But cancer doesn't care about your plans or your belief in invincibility. It's a thief, stealing moments, memories, and futures. And now, here I was, watching as they lowered my father into the ground, feeling like a part of me was being buried with him. I glanced at my mother, Catherine, standing beside me. Her face was a mask of grief, her eyes red-rimmed and vacant. She clutched my arm as if I was the only thing keeping her upright. In that moment, I realized that our roles had suddenly shifted. I was no longer just the daughter. I had become a pillar of support for my mother, who seemed lost in a sea of sorrow. As the funeral proceeded, I found myself drifting through a haze of condolences and sympathetic touches. Relatives I barely recognized, friends of my parents, and colleagues from Dad's law firm all offered their support. But their words washed over me like waves on a shore, leaving no lasting impression. All I could think about was the gaping hole Dad's absence had left in our lives. Later that evening, as the last of the mourners left our house, I found myself sitting alone in Dad's study. The room still smelled like him, a mixture of leather, old books, and the faint scent of his favorite cologne. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface of his desk, remembering all the times I'd sat here with him, discussing everything from my latest school project to my dreams for the future. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my reverie. Mom stood in the doorway, looking small and fragile in her black dress. "Emily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I join you?" I nodded, and she crossed the room to sit beside me on the leather couch. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the weight of our shared loss hanging heavy between us. "I don't know how to do this without him," Mom finally said, her voice breaking. "How are we supposed to go on?" I turned to look at her, seeing the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. It struck me then that I had never seen my mother look so vulnerable. She had always been the strong one, the organizer, the one who kept our family running smoothly. But now she seemed adrift, and I realized with a jolt that she was looking to me for answers. "We'll figure it out together, Mom," I said, taking her hand in mine. "Dad would want us to be strong." She nodded, squeezing my hand tightly. "You're right. Your father always said you were the smartest one in the family. He was so proud of you." "Emily." Her words brought a fresh wave of grief, but also a sense of responsibility. Dad had believed in me, had seen strength in me that I wasn't sure I possessed. But for him, for Mom, I would find that strength. As we sat there in the gathering darkness, I made a silent promise to my father. I would take care of Mom, I would finish college, and I would make him proud. It was the least I could do to honor his memory. Little did I know then how that promise would be tested in the months to come, or how it would shape the course of my life. The loss of my father was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about family, love, and the true meaning of strength. The days following the funeral blurred together in a haze of paperwork, phone calls, and endless cups of coffee. I had taken a leave of absence from college, promising my professors I'd be back for the next semester. But as I watched my mother struggle to navigate the simplest tasks, I began to wonder if that promise had been premature. It was on a rainy Tuesday, about 2 weeks after we'd laid Dad to rest, that the first cracks in our new reality began to show. I was sorting through a mountain of sympathy cards when Mom came into the kitchen, clutching a stack of papers with trembling hands. "Emily," she said, her voice quavering, "I don't understand any of this. Your father always handled the finances." I took the papers from her, recognizing them as bank statements and insurance documents. As I flipped through them, I felt a growing sense of unease. The numbers were much larger than I had expected, and there were accounts I'd never heard of before. "Mom, did you know about all these accounts?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She shook her head, looking lost. "Your father. He always said he was taking care of everything." I never questioned it. I spent the next few hours trying to make sense of our financial situation. What I discovered left me reeling. Dad had left us well provided for. There was a substantial life insurance policy, several investment accounts, and a trust in my name that I hadn't known existed. But along with this unexpected wealth came a host of complications. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that my world had shifted once again. I wasn't just responsible for emotionally supporting my mother anymore. I was now responsible for our financial well-being too. The weight of this new responsibility felt crushing. The next morning, I made an appointment with Dad's lawyer, Mr. Simmons. As I sat across from him in his wood-paneled office, I felt like a child playing dress-up in my mother's clothes, too small for the role I was being asked to fill. "Your father was a meticulous planner, Emily," Mr. Simmons said, his kind eyes watching me carefully. "He wanted to make sure you and your mother would be taken care of if anything happened to him." He slid a document across the desk to me. "This is his will. I think you'll find it's quite straightforward." I scanned the document, my heart pounding. The house was left to me, along with a trust that would cover my education and provide a monthly stipend. Mom was to receive a lump sum and the proceeds from Dad's life insurance policy. "But why leave the house to me?" I asked, confusion and a hint of panic coloring my voice. "Shouldn't it go to Mom?" Mr. Simmons leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Your father had his reasons, Emily. He believed you would be the best person to manage the family assets." As I left the lawyer's office, my mind was spinning. I had expected to be supporting my mother emotionally, but this was something else entirely. I was barely an adult myself, and now I was responsible for our family home and a significant amount of money. When I got home, I found Mom sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee in front of her. She looked up as I entered, her eyes searching my face. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice small. I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to explain everything. But before I could speak, Mom's face crumpled. "He left it all to you, didn't he?" she said, her voice a mixture of hurt and resignation. "Mom, no, it's not like that," I started, but she cut me off. "Your father always said you were the responsible one. I guess I shouldn't be surprised." Her words stung, and I felt a flicker of anger. Didn't she understand that I didn't ask for this? That I was just as lost and overwhelmed as she was? "Mom, please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad left you provided for too. We're in this together, remember?" She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. For the first time since Dad's death, I felt a distance growing between us, a chasm of unspoken words and hurt feelings. As I went to bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The grief of losing my father was still raw, but now it was compounded by a new worry, the fear that I might be losing my mother too, in a different, more insidious way. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a long and painful journey that would test the limits of our relationship and force me to confront truths about myself and my family that I never could have imagined. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. I threw myself into managing our affairs, determined to prove that Dad's faith in me wasn't misplaced. I met with financial advisors, sorted through mountains of paperwork, and tried to keep our household running smoothly. All the while, I watched Mom retreat further into herself, spending most of her days in her bedroom with the curtains drawn. It was on a particularly trying day, after yet another frustrating phone call with the insurance company, that I finally reached my breaking point. I stormed into Mom's room, my patience worn thin. "Mom, I need your help," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I can't do all of this on my own." She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and unfocused. "I'm sorry, Emily. I don't know how to do any of this without your father." Her words, meant to explain, only fueled my frustration. "And you think I do? I'm trying to figure this out too, Mom. I need you to be present." Something flickered in her eyes then. A spark of the strong, capable woman I remembered from before Dad's illness. She sat up straighter, pushing her tangled hair out of her face. "You're right," she said softly. "I've been letting you carry too much. What can I do to help?" It was a small moment, but it felt like a victory. For the first time since Dad's death, I felt like we were truly in this together. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Just as Mom and I were starting to find our footing, a new complication arose in the form of James Sullivan. James was an old friend of my parents, a charming widower who had always been on the periphery of our lives. He started showing up at our house more frequently, offering to help with odd jobs and bringing casseroles. At first, I was grateful for the support, but as the weeks went by, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. It was the little things at first, the way James's hand would linger on Mom's arm, the private jokes they seemed to share. Then one evening, as I was coming home late from a meeting with the bank, I saw them through the living room window. They were sitting close together on the couch, James's arm around Mom's shoulders as she leaned into him, laughing at something he'd said. I stood frozen on the porch, a mix of emotions churning in my stomach. Part of me was glad to see Mom smiling again, to see some life return to her eyes. But another part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, felt betrayed. It had only been 2 months since we'd buried Dad. How could she move on so quickly? I must have made a noise, because suddenly they both looked up, spotting me through the window. Mom's face flushed, and she quickly moved away from James. I took a deep breath and walked inside, plastering what I hoped was a neutral expression on my face. "Emily," Mom said, her voice too bright, too cheerful. "You remember James, don't you? He was just helping me sort through some of your father's old files." I nodded stiffly, muttering a hello. James stood up, smoothing down his shirt. "I should be going," he said, glancing between Mom and me. "Catherine, I'll call you tomorrow about that thing we discussed." After he left, an awkward silence fell between Mom and me. I busied myself in the kitchen, aggressively washing dishes that didn't need washing, while Mom hovered in the doorway. "Emily," she finally said, her voice soft. "I know what you must be thinking." I turned to face her, surprised to find tears in my eyes. "Do you?" "Because I don't even know what I'm thinking, Mom. It's only been 2 months." Her face crumpled. "I know, sweetheart. I miss your father every day. But James, he understands what I'm going through. He's been a good friend." I wanted to argue, to tell her it was too soon, that she was dishonoring Dad's memory. But the words stuck in my throat. Who was I to dictate how she should grieve? Wasn't I the one who had been pushing her to engage more with life? Just, "Be careful, Mom," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to see you get hurt." She crossed the room and pulled me into a hug. For a moment, I let myself be comforted by her familiar scent, by the feel of her arms around me. But as I pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us once again. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop my mind from racing. Was I being unfair to Mom? Was I letting my own grief cloud my judgment? Or was there something about James that truly warranted my suspicion? I tossed and turned, unable to find answers. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a complex dance of emotions and loyalties that would test the boundaries of my relationship with my mother in ways I never could have imagined. The weeks that followed were a strange dance of avoidance and forced normalcy. Mom seemed determined to act as if nothing had changed, chattering about mundane things over breakfast and asking about my day with an almost manic cheerfulness. But I could see the guilt in her eyes, the way she would sometimes trail off mid-sentence, lost in thought. James became a more frequent presence in our home, always with a ready smile and a helping hand. I tried to be civil, to give him a chance for Mom's sake, but every time I saw him sitting in Dad's favorite chair or using Dad's old coffee mug, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. One evening, about a month after I'd first seen them together, Mom approached me as I was studying in the living room. She perched on the edge of the couch, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Emily," she began, her voice hesitant, "I wanted to talk to you about James." I closed my textbook, bracing myself for what was to come. "What about him, Mom?" She took a deep breath. "He's asked me to go away with him for a weekend, to his cabin up in the mountains. I think I'm going to say yes." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, struggling to process what she was saying. "A weekend away? Mom, are you serious?" Her face flushed, a mix of defiance and embarrassment. "I know it might seem soon, but James makes me feel alive again. After your father died, I thought that part of me was gone forever." I stood up, suddenly needing to put some distance between us. "And what about Dad? Have you forgotten about him already?" As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Mom's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "How can you say that? I loved your father with all my heart." "I still do. But he's gone, Emily. And I need to find a way to keep living." I wanted to argue, to make her see how wrong this was. But looking at her, really looking at her, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. There was a light in her eyes that had been missing since Dad died. A spark of life that I'd been too caught up in my own grief to recognize. With a sigh, I sat back down beside her. "I'm sorry, Mom. I shouldn't have said that. It's hard for me to see you with someone else." She reached out, taking my hand in hers. "I know, sweetheart. And I'm not trying to replace your father, James. He's just a friend who understands what I'm going through. Nothing more." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Finally, Mom squeezed my hand. "I won't go if you really don't want me to, Emily. You're the most important person in my life, and I don't want to do anything to damage our relationship." Her words touched me, even as they filled me with a sense of responsibility I wasn't sure I was ready for. I took a deep breath, trying to push aside my own feelings and think about what was best for Mom. "No, it's okay," I said finally. "If this is what you need, then you should go. Just be careful, okay?" The smile that lit up her face was almost worth the ache in my heart. She pulled me into a tight hug, whispering thank yous into my hair. As I hugged her back, I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach that this was the beginning of something that would change our lives forever. The weekend Mom was away with James. I threw myself into work and study, trying to keep my mind off what might be happening at that cabin in the mountains. When Sunday evening rolled around and I heard the sound of Mom's car in the driveway, I was surprised by the wave of relief that washed over me. Mom breezed into the house, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright. She looked younger somehow, more vibrant than I'd seen her in months. "Emily, darling," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug. "Did you have a good weekend?" I nodded, studying her face. "How was your trip?" Her smile widened. "Oh, it was wonderful. The mountains were so beautiful. And James..." She trailed off, a dreamy look in her eyes. Well, let's just say it was exactly what I needed. I felt a knot forming in my stomach, but forced a smile. I'm glad you had a good time, Mom. Over the next few weeks, James became an even more constant presence in our lives. He was always around, helping with household chores, taking Mom out to dinner, even starting to weigh in on financial decisions. I tried to be happy for Mom, to see how James was bringing her back to life. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when things came to a head. I'd come home early from class to find James and Mom huddled over some papers at the kitchen table. They looked up guiltily when I walked in, and I immediately sensed tension in the air. "What's going on?" I asked, looking between them. Mom cleared her throat. "We were just discussing some financial matters, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But I'd caught a glimpse of the papers on the table. They were statements from the trust Dad had left me. "Are those my account statements?" I asked, my voice rising. "Why are you looking at those?" James stood up, his face a mask of concern. "Now, Emily, your mother is just trying to get a handle on the family finances. There's no need to get upset." His patronizing tone set my teeth on edge. "With all due respect, James, this isn't any of your business. These are my personal accounts." Mom jumped in, her voice placating. "Emily, please. James is just trying to help. He has a lot of experience with financial planning, and we thought—" "We?" I interrupted. "Mom, these are my accounts. Dad left them to me to manage. I don't need James's help." James put his hand on Mom's shoulder, and I saw red. "I think you should leave," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Emily," Mom exclaimed, "that's no way to speak to James. He's been nothing but kind to us." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Alone." James looked between us, then nodded. "Of course, I'll give you two some privacy." He leaned down and kissed Mom on the cheek before leaving, and I had to clench my fist to keep from saying something I'd regret. As soon as the front door closed behind him, I turned to Mom. "What's really going on here? Why are you letting him get involved in our finances?" Mom's face hardened. "James is a part of my life now, Emily, and he's just trying to help us get back on our feet." "Back on our feet?" I repeated incredulously. "Mom, we're not struggling. Dad left us well provided." "For what aren't you telling me?" She looked away, guilt flashing across her face. "James and we've been talking about the future, about maybe combining our households." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Combining households?" "Mom, it's been less than 6 months since Dad died. How can you even be thinking about this?" "I know it seems fast," she said, her voice pleading. "But James understands me in a way no one else does. He makes me feel alive again." I shook my head, feeling like the room was spinning. "And what about me? What about the life we had? Does that mean nothing to you?" Tears welled in Mom's eyes. "Of course it does, Emily. You're my daughter, and I love you more than anything. But I need to think about my future too. I can't just be your mother for the rest of my life." Her words stung more than I cared to admit. "I never asked you to be just my mother," I said quietly. "I thought we were in this together." Mom reached out to me, but I stepped back. "We are in this together, sweetheart. That's why I want you to give James a chance. He could be good for both of us." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw a stranger. This wasn't the mother I'd known all my life. This was someone new, someone shaped by grief and loneliness and a desperate need to feel whole again. "I need some air," I said, grabbing my keys. "Don't wait up for me." As I drove through the rain-slicked streets, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger at James for worming his way into our lives, hurt at Mom for seemingly forgetting Dad so quickly. And underneath it all, a deep, gnawing fear that the life I'd known, the family I'd loved, was slipping away from me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a storm that would test the very foundations of my relationship with my mother and force me to confront truths about myself and my family that I never could have imagined. The next few weeks were tense, to say the least. Mom and I danced around each other, our conversations stilted and superficial. James continued to be a constant presence, but I made myself scarce whenever he was around, retreating to my room or finding reasons to be out of the house. It was during one of these escapes that I found myself at the local coffee shop, nursing a latte and trying to lose myself in a textbook. I was so engrossed in my studies that I didn't notice someone approaching my table until they cleared their throat. I looked up to see Mr. Simmons, Dad's lawyer, standing there with a concerned look on his face. "Emily," he said, "I hope I'm not interrupting. Do you have a moment?" I nodded, gesturing for him to sit. He settled into the chair across from me, his brow furrowed. "I've been trying to reach you," he said. "There are some matters we need to discuss regarding your father's estate." My stomach clenched. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Not wrong, per se, but there have been some unusual activities on the accounts. I wanted to make sure you were aware of them." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What kind of activities?" Mr. Simmons pulled out a folder, spreading some documents on the table. "There have been several large withdrawals from the main account over the past month. And there's been an inquiry about possibly transferring ownership of the house." My head was spinning. Transferring ownership? To whom? He looked at me carefully. "The inquiry came from your mother, Emily. She was asking about the possibility of adding someone named James Sullivan to the deed." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. That's not possible. The house is in my name. She can't just transfer it." Mr. Simmons nodded. "You're correct. Any changes would require your signature. But Emily, I have to ask, is everything all right at home? These actions, they're not what your father intended when he set up these accounts." I took a deep breath, trying to sort through the whirlwind of emotions coursing through me. Anger, betrayal, fear, they all warred for dominance. "Things have been complicated," I finally said. "My mom, she's been seeing someone, James Sullivan." It's all happened very fast. Understanding dawned in Mr. Simmons's eyes. "I see. And this James, he's been involved in financial discussions?" I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "He's been trying to. I've been pushing back. But Mom, she seems to trust him completely." Mr. Simmons leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "Emily, I don't mean to alarm you, but I've seen situations like this before. Sometimes, when people are grieving, they can be vulnerable to influence, especially when it comes to financial matters." His words sent a chill through me. "What are you saying?" He sighed heavily. "I'm saying that you need to be careful. Your father left you in charge of these assets for a reason. He trusted your judgment. Don't let anyone pressure you into making decisions you're not comfortable with." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on my shoulders. "What should I do?" "For now, I'd recommend freezing the accounts," he said. "We can set it up so that any withdrawals or changes require your explicit approval. And Emily," he added, his voice softening, "don't be afraid to seek help if you need it. This is a lot for anyone to handle, let alone someone your age." As I left the coffee shop, my mind was reeling. The thought of Mom going behind my back, trying to change the ownership of the house, it felt like a betrayal of everything we'd been through together. And James. The more I thought about it, the more his constant presence in our lives seemed less like support and more like manipulation. I drove home in a daze, my emotions oscillating between hurt, anger, and a deep, gnawing fear. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw James's car parked in front of the house. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. As I walked into the house, I heard laughter coming from the kitchen. I found Mom and James sitting at the table, heads bent close together over a bottle of wine. They looked up as I entered, their smiles fading as they took in my expression. "Emily," Mom said, her voice cautious. "Is everything okay?" I looked between them, feeling a surge of anger. "No, Mom. Everything is not okay. We need to talk. Now." James stood up, reaching for his jacket. "Perhaps I should go." "No," I said firmly. "You should stay. This concerns you too." Mom's face paled. "Emily, what's going on?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just had a very interesting conversation with Mr. Simmons. He told me about the withdrawals from Dad's accounts and about your inquiry to add James to the house deed." The color drained from Mom's face. "Emily, I can explain." "Explain what, Mom?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Explain how you've been going behind my back, trying to give away the house Dad left to me. Explain how you've been spending money from accounts you don't have access to." James stepped forward, his hands raised placatingly. "Now, Emily, let's all calm down. Your mother and I were just exploring our options. We want to build a future together, and—" "A future together?" I repeated incredulously. "It's been 6 months since my father died. 6 months. And you're already talking about building a future together?" Mom stood up, tears in her eyes. "Emily, please, I know this is hard for you to understand, but James makes me happy. Don't you want me to be happy?" Her words hit me like a physical blow. "Of course I want you to be happy, Mom. But not like this. Not by erasing Dad's memory, not by giving away everything he worked for." James's face hardened. "Now listen here. Young lady, your mother is a grown woman who can make her own decisions. You need to show her some respect." Something inside me snapped. "Respect? You want to talk about respect? How about respecting my father's memory? How about respecting his wishes for his family and his assets?" Mom stepped between us, her face pleading. "Please, both of you stop. Emily, I know this is a shock, but James and I, we love each other. We want to start a life together." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw a stranger. This wasn't the mother who had raised me, who had stood by Dad's side for decades. This was someone new, someone shaped by grief and loneliness and a desperate need to feel whole again. "If that's what you want," I said, my voice cold, "then you can do it somewhere else. This is my house now, Mom. Dad left it to me, and I want you both out." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. James looked between us, his expression a mix of anger and calculation. "Emily," Mom whispered, "you don't mean that. We're family." I felt tears pricking at my own eyes, but forced them back. "Family doesn't go behind each other's backs, Mom. Family doesn't try to steal from each other. I'm sorry, but I need you to leave. Both of you." As I watched them pack their things, a part of me wanted to take it all back, to beg Mom to stay, to try to work things out. But a larger part, the part that sounded suspiciously like Dad, knew that this was necessary. Sometimes, love means making the hard choices, even when they break your heart. That night, as I sat alone in the empty house, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed, I felt the full weight of my decision settle on my shoulders. I had stood up for what I believed was right, for what Dad would have wanted. But in doing so, I had lost the only family I had left. As I drifted off to sleep, exhausted from the emotional toll of the day, I couldn't help but wonder, had I done the right thing? And more importantly, where did I go from here? The days that followed were a blur of emotion and activity. I threw myself into managing the estate, working closely with Mr. Simmons to secure the accounts and ensure everything was in order. I changed the locks on the house, a symbolic gesture that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. Mom called several times, leaving tearful voicemails that I couldn't bring myself to listen to. James, to his credit, seemed to have gotten the message and stayed away. But his absence only highlighted the gaping hole left by Mom's departure. It was about a week after the confrontation that I received an unexpected visitor. I was in the kitchen, half-heartedly pushing cereal around a bowl, when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Aunt Sarah, Dad's sister, standing on the porch. "Emily," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "Oh, sweetheart." I came as soon as I heard. I melted into her embrace, feeling the tears I'd been holding back for days finally start to fall. Aunt Sarah had always been a source of comfort, a link to Dad that felt especially precious now. We settled in the living room, cups of tea growing cold as I poured out the whole story. Aunt Sarah listened without judgment, her face a mix of sympathy and concern. "Oh, Emily," she sighed when I finished. "You've been carrying so much on your shoulders. Your father would be so proud of how you've handled things." Her words were like a balm to my battered spirit. "Do you really think so? Sometimes I feel like I've made a terrible mistake. Maybe I was too harsh with Mom." Aunt Sarah shook her head. "You did what you had to do to protect yourself and your father's legacy. Your mother, well, grief can make people do strange things, but that doesn't excuse her actions." We talked for hours, Aunt Sarah sharing stories about Dad that I'd never heard before, helping me feel connected to him in a way I hadn't since his death. As the afternoon wore on, I felt some of the weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't alone in this after all. Before she left, Aunt Sarah turned to me, her expression serious. "Emily, I want you to know that you always have a place with us. If you need a break, if you need family around you, our door is always open." I hugged her tightly, grateful beyond words for her support. As I watched her drive away, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, I could get through this. The next day, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could control how I moved forward. I spent the morning cleaning the house from top to bottom, packing away some of Mom's things that she'd left behind. It was a cathartic process, each box sealed feeling like a step towards reclaiming my space, my life. As I was sorting through some papers in Dad's old study, I came across a letter I'd never seen before. It was addressed to me, in Dad's familiar handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. I hope you know how much I love you, how proud I am of the woman you've become. I know the road ahead won't be easy, but I have faith in your strength and your heart. I've left the house and a significant portion of our assets in your name, not just because I trust you to manage them wisely, but because I want you to have the freedom to build your own life on your own terms. Your mother and I have had our time, our adventures. Now it's your turn. I know your mother will struggle with my loss. She's always leaned on me, perhaps too much. But Emily, you can't put your life on hold to be her crutch. Help her, love her, but don't let her hold you back from becoming the amazing person I know you can be. Remember, sweetheart, that life is full of hard choices. Sometimes doing the right thing means making decisions that hurt in the moment. But I believe in you. You have a strength inside you that you haven't even begun to tap into. I love you, Emily, always and forever. Dad." By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. It was as if Dad was speaking to me from beyond, giving me the guidance and reassurance I so desperately needed. His words gave me strength, validating the difficult choices I'd made and giving me hope for the future. In the days that followed, I felt a shift in my perspective. The house no longer felt like a burden, but a gift, a launching pad for the life Dad wanted me to build. I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined to make him proud. It was about a month after my confrontation with Mom and James that I received an unexpected call. It was Mom, her voice small and hesitant. On the other end of the line, "Emily," she said, I was hoping we could talk. In person." I felt a flutter of anxiety in my stomach, but Dad's words echoed in my mind. I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a small cafe in town. When I arrived, I almost didn't recognize her. Mom looked older, tired, the sparkle that had been in her eyes during her time with James noticeably absent. We sat in awkward silence for a few moments before she spoke. "I owe you an apology, Emily," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I was so lost after your father died. James made me feel alive again, and I got caught up in that feeling. I lost sight of what was really important." I listened silently, my heart aching at the pain in her voice. "James," she continued, "he wasn't who I thought he was. Once we left, well, let's just say his true colors came out. I see now how he was manipulating me, using my grief to his advantage." I reached out, taking her hand. "Oh, Mom," she squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Emily, for everything. You were right to stand up to us, to protect what your father left for you. I was too blinded by my own pain to see what I was doing to you, to our family. We talked for hours, really talked, in a way we hadn't since before Dad died." Mom told me about the wake-up call she'd had, how she'd finally seen through James's facade. I shared with her the letter from Dad, watching as she smiled through her tears at his words. As our coffee grew cold and the cafe emptied around us, I felt something shift between us. The hurt wasn't gone, the trust not fully repaired, but there was a glimmer of hope, a foundation we could build on. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Mom said as we prepared to leave. "I know I have a lot to make up for, but I hope we can start to rebuild our relationship." I hugged her, feeling the familiar comfort of her embrace. "I'd like that, Mom. It won't be easy, but I think Dad would want us to try." As I drove home that evening, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead wouldn't be smooth. There were still hurts to heal, trust to rebuild. But for the first time in months, I felt hope for the future. I walked into the house, my house, and looked around with new eyes. This wasn't just a reminder of what I'd lost, but a symbol of the life I could build. Dad had given me this gift, this opportunity to forge my own path. Standing in the study, surrounded by memories of Dad and the echoes of the family we'd once been, I made a silent promise. I would honor his memory not by clinging to the past, but by embracing the future. He'd wanted for me, I would build a life that would make him proud, full of love, integrity, and purpose. As I sat down at his old desk, I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. At the top, I wrote, "My future." It was time to start planning, to dream big, to become the woman Dad had always believed I could be. The journey ahead would be challenging, filled with ups and downs, moments of doubt and triumph. But I was ready to face it head-on, armed with the love of those who had gone before and the strength I discovered within myself. This wasn't an ending, I realized. It was a beginning, my beginning. And I couldn't wait to see where it would lead.